I watched 41 security clips I have no memory of being in. He looked exactly like me. Same jacket, same walk, same hands. But somewhere around clip 30, I realized something that's been harder to shake than the fear. He looked rested. He walked like someone going somewhere he actually wanted to go. I have never walked like that. Then I found the job application. 11 pages. My name, my signature. A 5-year vision I'd never imagined. Submitted 2 weeks ago, on a night I remember watching a film and going to bed at 11. I didn't withdraw it. I got the promotion. I still don't know which one of us wrote this. I worked at a logistics dispatch office on the south side of the industrial estate. The kind of building that nobody visits unless they're delivering something or lost. 2 stories, beige cladding, a car park that smelled of diesel even on Sundays. I'd been there 4 years by the time any of this started, long enough to have my own mug in the kitchen, and short enough that I still felt like I could leave without anyone noticing. My shifts ran from 1 in the afternoon until 10 at night. I liked the hours. The morning crew handled the chaos, and by the time I came in, the day had already settled into something predictable. Drivers calling in about traffic on the M6, warehouse pulling stock, the same 3 managers cycling through the same 3 complaints. I sat in a glass-walled office on the first floor with a headset and 2 monitors, and most evenings I left through the side door, scanned my badge, walked across the car park to my Astra, and drove home to a flat I shared with nobody. My girlfriend had moved out the previous spring. We were still on speaking terms, the way you are with someone you used to love before you started actively avoiding each other's birthdays. Her name was Helena. She lived in Stockport now with a man called Owen who worked in insurance. I mention her because she comes up later, and because the version of my life I'm describing was the version she would have recognized. Quiet, boring, functional. The kind of life that doesn't have room in it for anything strange. The first time I noticed something off was a Wednesday in late October. I'd come in at 1 as usual, worked the shift, and stayed about 20 minutes late because a driver called Marek had jackknifed near crew, and I needed to coordinate the recovery. By the time I scanned out at the side door, it was nearly 10:30. I remember the exact time because I checked my phone in the car park and thought about whether the Tesco Express would still be open. The next morning, my line manager, a woman called Priya, sent me a Teams message asking if I'd come back into the office after I'd left. I said no. She said the night security had flagged something, nothing serious, just a query about door logs. Could I pop down to the security office before my shift? I said sure. The security office was in the back of the ground floor, run by a man named Dean who'd been there longer than anyone else in the building. He had the kind of face that always looked mildly disappointed. He sat me down, turned his monitor towards me, and pulled up the footage from the side door at 10:26 the previous night. There I was, walking out. Grey jacket, lanyard still on, phone in my left hand. The timestamp said 22:26. I watched myself push the door open and walk out of frame towards the car park. Then Dean clicked to a different file. Same camera, same door. The timestamp said 22:32. I walked in. Same jacket, same lanyard, same phone in the same hand. I came through the door from outside, scanned my badge, and walked back into the building. Dean looked at me. He wasn't accusing me of anything. He just wanted to know why I'd come back in for 40 seconds and left again, because the second exit was at 22:33. He said the system had logged the badge scan both times, and that was what had triggered the flag. Because the entry between the 2 exits was so brief, it looked like the door had been propped. I told him I hadn't come back. I told him I'd walked to my car and driven home. He nodded, the way you nod at someone who's clearly forgotten something minor, and said not to worry about it. Probably I'd left my phone or something. Probably I'd nipped back for it and not registered. I went up to my office and sat down and tried to remember nipping back in. I couldn't. But the thing about memory is that you can't trust the absence of a thing. Maybe I'd gone back for something. Maybe I'd grabbed a charger off my desk. I checked my desk. Nothing was missing or out of place. I checked my bag. Everything I expected to be there was there. I worked the shift and I forgot about it by the time I got home, the way you forget most small confusions. 2 weeks passed. Nothing strange happened. I want to be clear about that, because later I tried very hard to remember if there had been signs in those 2 weeks, and there hadn't been. Life was completely ordinary. I went to a colleague's leaving drinks. I had a tooth filled. I bought a new kettle. The second incident was on a Friday. I'd been on a long call with a client in Rotterdam and finished about 5 minutes after 10. I packed up, scanned out, drove home. Same routine. The next Monday, Priya called me into her office and asked, in the careful way she asked things when she wasn't sure how to phrase them, whether I had any concerns about my hours. I said no. She said HR had flagged a discrepancy on the Friday. The badge log showed me scanning into the building at 21:54 and scanning out at 22:01. 7 minutes. But my computer activity, my call logs, and the timestamps on the emails I'd sent across the afternoon showed I'd been at my desk since 1 in the afternoon as normal. I told her there must be a mistake with the system. She said that was probably it. She said she'd raised it with IT. She also said, and this is the part I kept turning over later, that the camera on the side door showed me walking out at 21:48 and walking in at 21:54 and walking out again at 22:01. 3 movements. The first exit had no corresponding badge scan. I asked to see the footage. She said she'd have to clear it with Dean, but she didn't see why not. I watched it that afternoon. The first exit, the one without a badge scan, was me. Same jacket, same bag. I walked out of the building at 21:48 carrying my bag over my left shoulder. 6 minutes later I walked back in, scanning the badge, bag still over the same shoulder. 7 minutes after that, I walked out again. Badge scan registered and went to my car. I'd been on the Rotterdam call at 21:48. I had a recording of it. My voice was on the recording talking about palletization standards. For the entire window between 21:40 and 22:05. There was no possible way I had been walking out of the building at 21:48. But I had been. I'd watched myself do it. I went home that night, and I sat in the car park of my building for about half an hour before I went up. I kept thinking about how the man on the footage had walked. He'd walked exactly like me. He hadn't been hurried or furtive. He'd looked like a man going home after a normal shift. He'd looked, in fact, more like me than I felt at that moment, sitting in the Astra with the engine off, staring at my own hands. I called Helena. I don't know why. We hadn't spoken in about 3 months. She picked up on the 4th ring and sounded tired and surprised in equal measure. I told her I was just checking in. She asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. And then I asked her something I couldn't have explained the reason for if she'd pushed me on it. I asked her whether, when we'd been together, I had ever done anything she couldn't account for. Disappeared for an hour. Come home and not remembered where I'd been. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, in a very careful voice, that there had been a period about 2 years ago when I used to leave the flat at night and come back without any explanation. She said she'd asked me about it once, and I told her I'd been for a walk. She said I hadn't been dressed for a walk. She said it had stopped after a few months and she'd never brought it up again because I'd seemed embarrassed and she hadn't wanted to make it worse. I had no memory of any of this. None. I told her I didn't remember. She said she knew. She said that was what had worried her at the time. She said I'd seemed completely sincere when I'd told her about the walks, like I genuinely believed I had been on them. She'd assumed I was sleepwalking, or stressed, or having an affair I'd compartmentalized so thoroughly I'd forgotten it. She said she'd decided to wait and see if it stopped, and it had stopped, and she'd let it go. I asked her when exactly it had stopped. She thought for a moment. She said around the time we started arguing about the Birmingham move, April 2 years ago. April of the year we broke up. I thanked her and hung up and sat in the car for another 40 minutes. I want to describe what happened next as carefully as I can, because the order of things matters. I started checking the cameras. Not just at work. I asked the building manager of my flat if I could see the lobby footage from the previous night, and I made up a story about a parcel. He let me sit with him for 10 minutes while I scrolled. I had come home at 22:41, exactly when I would have expected to. I had gone up in the lift alone, nothing unusual. But when I scrolled back further, to nights from the previous weeks, I saw myself leaving the building at strange times. 1:20 in the morning. On a Tuesday, I had no memory of waking up. 4 in the afternoon on a Saturday I'd spent in. Each time I came back within an hour. Each time I was wearing clothes I owned. Each time I looked, on camera, like someone going about ordinary business. The building manager noticed me lingering on one of the clips and asked if everything was all right. I said yes. I asked him as casually as I could whether he ever saw me coming and going. He said, "Not really. Why?" I said, "No reason. I drove to work that afternoon, and I did something I'd been avoiding." I asked Dean to pull every clip of me on the side door camera for the past 3 months. He didn't want to. I told him I was worried about a stalking situation, and I wanted to check whether anyone had been waiting for me in the car park. It was a lie that worked because Dean liked feeling useful, and within 2 days he had compiled a folder. There were 41 clips. I had worked 62 shifts in those 3 months. I had scanned in and out at the expected times for all 62, but the camera had captured me entering or leaving the building 41 additional times that did not correspond to any badge scan. Sometimes in the middle of my shift, when I knew I had been at my desk. Sometimes on days I hadn't worked at all. Once at 3 in the morning on a Sunday. In every clip I looked normal. In every clip I walked the way I walk. In every clip I was wearing something from my own wardrobe. I sat in Dean's office and watched all 41 clips back to back. And somewhere around clip 30, I noticed something I want to describe carefully. The man on the footage was not exactly me. I don't mean he looked different. He looked identical. I mean that as I watched, I started to feel a quality I can only describe as poise. He moved with a kind of low, settled confidence that I do not have. He did not check his pockets when he walked. He did not glance at his phone. He pushed doors with the flat of his hand instead of the handle. He walked, to put it bluntly, like someone who had nothing on his mind. And I have always had something on my mind. I went home that night and I tried something. I set up the camera on my laptop to record continuously. I left it running on the kitchen counter facing the front door of the flat. I went to bed at the normal time. I slept, as far as I was aware, normally. In the morning I checked the recording. At 3:42 in the morning the front door of my flat opened from the inside. I walked out, dressed in jeans and the black jumper I'd worn the previous Tuesday, and closed the door behind me. The recording continued for another 2 hours and 40 minutes before the door opened again. I came back in. I took my shoes off in the hall. I went into the bedroom. The recording ended when my laptop battery died at 6:53. I had no memory of any of it. I want to say that I went to a doctor at this point, or to the police, or to a sleep clinic, but I didn't, and I should be honest about why. It was because I wasn't frightened in the way you would expect. I was frightened, but it was a small, distant fright, like hearing about something terrible happening in another country. The man on the recording had not done anything wrong. He had gone out and come back. He had taken his shoes off in the hall. He had been, by every visible measure, a perfectly considerate occupant of my flat. And there was something else which I've thought about a lot since, and which I still don't fully understand. When I watched the recording of him leaving, I felt something that wasn't quite envy, but was related to it. He looked rested. He looked like he was going somewhere he wanted to go. I went to work the next day and I did a strange thing. I logged into the HR portal and I checked my own performance reviews. They were the most recent in a series of quarterly reviews going back to when I started. I read them in reverse chronological order. The reviews from the past 18 months were all glowing. Initiative, leadership, willingness to take on extra responsibility. A note from Priya in March of the previous year said I had become the most reliable point of escalation in the team. Another in July described me as a calm and present manager. I had no memory of being any of these things. I remember being competent. I remember showing up. I do not remember initiative. I do not remember being calm and present. I had been, for as long as I could honestly recall, a man who did the minimum and went home. I scrolled further. The reviews from before 18 months ago were different. They described someone who met expectations but kept to himself. Someone who needed to be more proactive. Someone who had potential he wasn't using. The shift had happened in April. 2 years ago, this April. The same month Helena had said the night walks stopped. I thought for a long time about what that might mean. I thought about it during my shift, and I thought about it in the car on the way home. And I was still thinking about it when I got into bed that night. I thought about how the night walks hadn't stopped. They had only stopped being something I came home from. I want to describe the last thing carefully because it is the part I am least able to explain. I went into work the following Monday, and Priya called me into her office and told me, with a kind of pleased nervousness, that I had been put forward for a regional operations role. She said the application had gone in 2 weeks ago. She said I'd written an excellent personal statement. She said the panel had been particularly impressed by my 5-year vision for the Southern Corridor. I had not written a personal statement. I had not applied for any role. I had no 5-year vision for anything. I asked her very carefully if I could see the application. She forwarded it to me. It was 11 pages long. It was written in a voice I recognized as similar to mine, but not identical, in the way that a recording of your own voice is not identical to the voice you hear in your head. It described projects I had supposedly led. It cited metrics I had never compiled. It included a paragraph about how the past 2 years had been transformative for me personally, and how I had used that period of growth to develop a clearer sense of what I wanted from my career. At the bottom of the document was an electronic signature, with my name and the date, 2 weeks earlier. I checked my calendar for that date. I had been at home that evening. I remembered watching a film. I remembered going to bed at 11. I closed the document. I sat at my desk for a while. Then I did something I want to be very honest about. I didn't withdraw the application. I told myself I would think about it. I told myself there was no rush. I told myself I would talk to someone, eventually, about all of it. The cameras and the walks and the application, and I would figure out what was happening to me. But underneath those thoughts there was another thought, quieter and harder to look at directly, which was that whatever was using my hours was using them better than I was. He had built something with the time I'd been losing. Not a separate life. My life. The one that on paper I was apparently living. The promotion was for me. The reviews were for me. Helena, when I'd called her, had spoken to me as if I were the man she had once been worried about and was now relieved to have heard from. He hadn't taken anything. He had only filled in the parts of the day I wasn't using. It has been 4 months since I watched the 41 clips in Dean's office. I got the regional operations role. I moved to a slightly bigger flat closer to the new office. I haven't set the laptop up to record again. I considered it once and decided against it. And I think the reason I decided against it is the part of this I would most like someone else to explain to me, because I cannot. I'm writing this on a Sunday afternoon. I have been at the desk for about an hour. In a few minutes I am going to stop writing and make a cup of tea and probably not think about any of this again for a while. The flat is quiet. The door is closed. I can see my reflection in the dark screen of the television across the room, sitting where I am sitting, wearing what I am wearing. What I cannot tell you, and what I have stopped trying to work out, is which of us has been the one writing.